Let's talk about tell, don't ask. So tell, don't ask is a piece of OO-related programming advice that gets passed around a lot. And here are two quick ways of saying it. So first, we shouldn't ask objects what's going on inside them and then decide what to do. We should just send that object a message and let it decide what to do. And here's a slightly terser formulation, which gets at the more general idea, which is you often want to have data and the methods that operate on that data in the same place. Now, I used to follow tell, don't ask fairly religiously and thought it was almost always a good idea, but my understanding of this concept has gotten more nuanced over the years, and so I'm going to be showing a number of examples that start off not following tell, don't ask, and I'm going to refactor them to follow tell, don't ask, but then we're going to discuss the pros and cons of the refactoring, and we'll see that in each case, there is always some sort of con. Let's take a look at our first example. So this class does not follow tell, don't ask, and here's the violation. We are passing in a subscription, and then we ask it a question. We ask it if it's active, and if it is, we tell it to do one thing, and if it's not, we tell it to do another. So in this case, we want to charge for subscriptions when they're active, but even if they are inactive, we still create a charge just for an amount of 0. So just to be clear, if we wanted to follow tell, don't ask here, we would instead just send a message directly to subscription and let it decide how to charge. I'm going to pull up my specs real quick. Here you can see the same information, just written out in code. Here's our active subscription, and when we run the subscription charger, we expect there to be a charge of 100. Here we have an inactive subscription, and the last charge should be 0. And that last amount charged is just looking at the last charge in the database. So we're starting off green. Let's hop back to our code, and let's refactor to follow tell, don't ask. In this case, this is the first step. We're going to move this conditional into the subscription itself and just tell subscription to charge. Now, since subscription already has a charge method, I'm just calling this charge bang. When I run our specs, we're going to get an error about an undefined method called charge bang. And here we're getting an error about the fact that we didn't actually create charges now. We can fix that. And we're going to fix this by moving over this conditional. Okay, now because the charge method is in the subscription, we don't need to reference this at subscription here. So we can delete all of those references, and if we rerun the specs, we're back to green. So now subscription charger follows tell, don't ask. It's not asking anything at all, it's just telling subscription to do something. Let's talk about the pros and cons. So here, the data and the method that operates upon it are together. So we're looking at this Boolean flag, and we are calling this charge method, and we're referencing an amount. And we can do all those things on our local instance because the method and the data are in the same place. That's nice. We don't have to worry about an extra class. We don't have to worry about passing in a collaborator. Additionally, if we're going to make changes to how we charge for subscriptions, it's likely to be contained to this class. Whether we change the active flag or the amount attribute or the charge method, they're all in this one class, and so it's likely that changes will be constrained to this class, which is nice because it avoids a smell known as shotgun surgery, which is when you need to make a change and you find yourself making changes in lots and lots of files. That's often a smell that your data and the methods that operate on that data are not close to each other. So those are two wins. Let's talk about the cons. So you can see that subscription inherits from application record, which means it's an active record instance, which means it already has responsibilities. It's already responsible for persistence and eventually later probably associations as well, possibly validation. So there's already several responsibilities here, likely to be some later, and we just added a new one. We added the responsibility for knowing how to charge for subscriptions. So we've taken a class that's already somewhat complex and made it more complex. and it's likely that that complexity is going to grow over time. So this is a good example of a time when I often don't follow tell don't ask, is when the class that I would be co-locating the data and behavior in is already an active record instance. So in this case, I would probably revert back to the original way we had subscription charger and keep that behavior over there, even though this class wouldn't follow tell don't ask. I'd rather not layer in more responsibilities to active record instances. This is doubly true for me for things like the user class, which almost always gets bloated in Rails applications, or an object that I suspected was going to be a core part of the app. Like if this were a to-do application and this were the to-do object, I would work really hard to not add behavior to it. Let's look at a second example. This class doesn't actually quite violate tell don't ask yet, so let's make it violate it more directly and more clearly, and then we can refactor away from it. Let's start by getting our specs going. I'm not going to walk you through those specs because they're a little ugly, because the example's a little ugly, but just know that we're covered by tests here. So let's get going. This failure is pretty terrible, mostly because the specs are kind of terrible, which is because the code isn't very great. But the core issue here is that we didn't call run bang on the Twitter timeline poster. Cool. Back to green. Let's do the same thing here. Same lousy error. Cool, back to green. Now the tell don't ask violation is quite clear. In each case, we're asking the authentication method what its class is, and then telling it to do something. But we can do a nice refactoring here, which is replace conditional with polymorphism. We can just call authentication method.post directly and still pass, because each time the correct client just gets the message. So before, didn't follow tell don't ask, now we are. Talk about pros and cons once again. In this case, we've removed a conditional. I really like that. Very often when I can remove a conditional with a refactoring, I choose to do so. Conditionals are the source of a lot of complexity in code, and I'm quite eager to remove them most of the time. In addition, we can add new clients without changes to this class, to the comment poster itself. I'm sure you could imagine something like email client, and then we just need to define a post method that takes a comment and know what to do with it correctly. No changes required up here. One more pro. We removed an ISA call, or actually two ISA calls. Almost every time you see ISA in your Ruby code, you should think of it as a smell. It's questionable to ask an object what its class is. Instead, you'd rather just be sending it messages and letting Ruby's polymorphism code decide what object gets that message. The con to this is that it's not quite clear to me that our Twitter client and our Facebook client should know about how to post comments. It's nice that here we can just rely on polymorphism and have comments get posted to the right place depending on how the user authenticated, but it feels a bit weird to have comment information and timeline information in these clients. So once again, just like last time, we are adding a responsibility to a class that likely already has other responsibilities. That's a consistent drawback of following tell don't ask. Let's look at one final example, and we'll start off in the specs.